The Easter story is a story we all know so well. On Good Friday, Jesus was crucified because the Jewish Sabbath starts at sunset on Friday, and Jewish custom required that a body be buried before the Sabbath. Jesus' body was removed from the cross and hastily placed in this borrowed tomb. Very early on Sunday, the third day, 3 women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and a third named Salome, travel out of the city to the tomb with spices they needed to anoint a body, because there had not been time to do this on Friday. And this body, which had been so mistreated, needed respect and love. Along the way, as they walk, they wonder how they're going to move the stone door from the front of the tomb. But when they arrive at the tomb, they discover the stone door had already been rolled away. And so, standing at the door of the tomb, bending down and peering into the darkness, they can see that Jesus' body is not there. It is missing. There is, however, a young man sitting in the tomb. He is not Jesus. He's dressed in a white robe, and that is, as we know, the calling card of heavenly beings. The 3 women, they're greatly alarmed. But the man says to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified." As if maybe, possibly, they had gone to the wrong tomb. He informs that no, they have not. You are in the right place. You're looking for your friend Jesus, but he has been raised. He is not here. Look, here's the place where they laid the body, but now I need you to go and tell the disciples, and Peter as well, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him, just as he told you. And upon hearing this, the women, they run from that tomb, and they are seized with terror and amazement because they don't understand what is going on. According to Mark, the women say nothing to anybody because they were so terribly afraid. And that's where this gospel ends, right there. Mark concludes his gospel with the words, "For they were afraid," and no more. He ends the gospel with the women's angelic encounter and then their immediate exit. And that's it. During this season of Lent, I have been preaching a sermon series in which I have focused on the significant events that took place during Holy Week, from Palm Sunday up to Easter. And I've titled this series, "A Week of Holy Terror," because as we examine the events of that soul-shattering week, we can't help but be appalled at the many terrors inflicted upon Jesus. He's betrayed by those close to him. Peter denies knowing him. Jesus is arrested. He's tried, and although innocent, he's declared guilty. He's dragged through the streets of Jerusalem and mocked and beaten. He's rejected by the crowds. He's executed by the detestable practice of crucifixion. He dies. He descends into hell. I began this sermon series with the account of the cleansing of temple that took place on Holy Monday when Jesus entered the great temple in Jerusalem. And there he disrupted the commerce of the money changers and the merchants, accusing them of turning his Father's house into a den of thieves. We resume then on Thursday of Holy Week with Jesus' celebration of the Passover meal, an event that we have come to know as the Last Supper. At that meal, he announced that one of those present would betray him. Peter declared, "Certainly not I. I would give my life for you." Of course, he doesn't. At the meal, Jesus institutes what we now know as the Eucharist or communion, breaking the bread and pouring the wine and sharing it with his disciples as a reminder that even when he is gone, he will always be with them. And then following that meal, Jesus led the disciples out of the city to Gethsemane. And we watch as Jesus prays and as the disciples sleep. And this goes on until Judas arrives with a small armed mob. And they arrest Jesus and drag him back to the city, to the palace of the high priest. And there we endure the fraudulent proceedings of a trial held before the Sanhedrin. And the prosecutors in that trial, they couldn't even get their witnesses' testimony to agree with one another. So finally, the high priest comes down and asks Jesus directly, "Are you the Messiah?" And Jesus responds saying, "I am." And the Sanhedrin declares him guilty of blasphemy and say he should be sentenced to death for this. But because the Jews did not have the authority to execute someone, they needed to take him to the Roman governor Pilate. And then in a second trial, on Friday, Jesus is accused not of blasphemy, but of being king of the Jews. Pilate asked the people who they would like for him to release that year, to pardon, and the people call for Barabbas. Pilate asked, "Don't you want your king to be released?" And they go, "No, release Barabbas." And Pilate asked them, "So what should I do with him?" And the crowd roars, "Crucify him." And Jesus is sent to the cross. Last Sunday, I told you that the crucifixion was not some ad hoc or impromptu event, but it was part of God's great plan for the salvation of all. It was a plan that had begun generations earlier with a covenant that God initiated with Abraham and Sarah. At the same time, Jesus is wholly obedient in carrying out this plan of God, despite the fact that Jesus must die and descend into hell. And so today, Easter Sunday, we will complete this series by going to the tomb on Easter morning. Now, as I said, Mark is unique among the gospel writers in that he does not give us any information after those women visit the tomb. In the other gospels, we find evidence as proof that Jesus has risen from the dead. But in Mark, the tomb is empty and no one gets to see Jesus or touch the nail holes in his hands. There's no Great Commission in which Jesus sends his followers out to make disciples of all nations. There's no recounting of the Hebrew Scriptures or a meal shared with travelers to Emmaus. There's no intimate conversation with Mary in the garden. And there's certainly no sudden arrival of the risen Christ among the disciples behind locked doors. None of this is to be found in Mark's gospel. And scholars are at a loss to tell us why. Some have even suggested that there is more to Mark's gospel, but the last pages have been lost. But I disagree. Because as I see it, Mark ends his story here, because that is where the story needs to end. The women, they go to the tomb, and they learn from this angelic being that Jesus has indeed been raised. Now, Mark's gospel is the earliest of the four gospels to be written, and he's writing to a community of faithful believers. And he doesn't need to give the ending because they know this story. They know what happens because they are the story of what happened. Mark is writing to the church's first generation. And from what we've learned from our study of all the Gospels, and especially these readings during Holy Week, we've learned that no one really understood who Jesus was. Even the disciples, especially the disciples. And when Jesus asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered correctly, "You are the Messiah." But it's clear that although this was the correct answer, it came from Peter's head and not from his heart. Peter claimed that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God, but we see that he didn't have faith in those words, because if he had, he would not have denied Jesus. If he had, he would not have fled from Jesus. If he had, he would have died with Jesus. And the same goes for the other disciples. They see Jesus in different ways, as a rabbi, a teacher, a mentor, a religious leader, a healer even. But they are all unable to take the next step and see him as the Son of God who is there with them. At the tomb on Easter Sunday, those women go to anoint a corpse. They go expecting to find a corpse, even though Jesus had told them time and time again that he would die, but he would also be raised. They clearly don't believe it. It's just too much to believe. And so when they arrive at the tomb and it's empty, and this stranger tells them that they're looking for Jesus who's not here, they are shaken to the core. They are shaken to the core with a holy terror, because now they're beginning to understand who Jesus is. He was who he said he was. He was the Messiah. And if he's the Messiah, that means that God is real and present and so close they could touch him. And they're terrified because they realize that all their lives that God had been with them and they had not known it. I have no doubt that these women were good and righteous followers, that they believed in God and that they believed, like Peter, that Jesus is the Messiah. They knew what to say, but that did not translate into faith. And just as the troubled man earlier prayed to Jesus, "I believe," he also prayed, "Help my unbelief." Have you ever had a moment, such a moment when you became aware of God's presence? It can be a very reassuring moment, but it can also be terrifying. If God is real, then we need to change who we are and how we live to align ourselves with God. And I have no doubt that all of us here believe. We have gathered on Easter Sunday, and it's our belief that brings us here, but it's our unbelief that demands help. Do we have the faith that Jesus is the Messiah? Today's Sunday. It is Easter. But it is also Sunday just like every other. And we come here and we give thanks and we worship. But to be honest, are we like the women at the tomb who come fully expecting to find a body there? Because that's the normal course of things. Dead things stay dead. Or is it possible that we might come to church to look for life instead of death? There's an amazing quote by the American poet and writer Annie Dillard. It's a quote, it's been around a long time, and preachers truly love this quote. You may be familiar with it. Annie Dillard writes about people who are in church and how safe they feel. She says, we're like passengers on a cruise ship. We're enjoying life. We're not paying attention to the conditions or the weather outside. But then she says, when we come to church, it is madness to wear ladies' straw hats or velvet hats to church. We should be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. For the sleeping God may wake someday and take offense. Or the waking God may draw us to where we can never return. We come to church wanting to feel safe, when really we should be anticipating the holy terror of being changed, of getting caught up and becoming a follower of Jesus. Mark's gospel concludes with the empty tomb, but it doesn't end there. It ends with a promise told by the angel who says, Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And the promise is that Jesus is always ahead of us, calling us, clearing a path for us. He's waiting for us. And that promise becomes an invitation of faith for us all. And the disciples, despite their years of being at Jesus' side, traveling with him, hearing him speak, their faith still falls short. They deny, they desert. It's only after they encounter the risen Christ that they are able to go forth and make disciples of the world and do the work of the church. And they're able to do this not because of their faith in Jesus, but because of the faithfulness that Jesus has in them. And that's the gift of Easter. The promise that Jesus is not just with us, but is going before us. It's the gift called the church, which was called into being at Pentecost. It's the gift that allowed Peter, who had done so many things wrong, to become the church's leader. It's the faith that holds us together today. And this is the Easter story. That Christ is with us, that Christ has faith in us. And that story continues to be written. So as we leave the empty tomb, we are free to choose our own adventure. Where do we go? What do we do? Who do we desire to be? Are we going to go to Galilee and encounter the risen Christ? Do we become those who strive to bring God's kingdom to all? Do we commit to ending human suffering? Do we believe that Christ is with us and we are with Christ? Do we choose to repent and believe the good news? Are we willing to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow? Are we willing to serve one another in his name? On this glorious Easter Sunday, these are our choices. So let us go out and write our story together.